Hi everyone, I'm Lindsay O'Donnell Welch with ThreatPost, and I'm here at RSA Conference 2020 in San Francisco, joined by Alex Tilley with SecureWorks. Alex, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, how's your RSA conference going?
It's been great. I'm just getting over my jet lag.
Feel you there, definitely. A little crazy.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about cybercrime in general, but maybe just to start, SecureWorks on Wednesday released a really interesting report about a threat group, Iranian threat group called Cobalt Ulster, which is also known as Muddy Water and has a couple of other names. And recently, you had been tracking this threat group, and they had been targeting a couple of different government agencies across a couple different countries, and they were discovered to be distributing a new type of malware called Forler.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about the campaign from kind of a high-profile standpoint and what you found there?
Yeah, definitely. It was a relatively straightforward sort of spear phishing campaign using malicious Excel spreadsheet documents, that sort of stuff, with macros attached to them. So you have to obviously enable the macros and let them execute, which is a security control that we have, but sort of everyone just gets around it by just saying enable, allow it to do everything. But the interesting part about the malware is that some of its command and control was done via DNS text fields. And that was a really interesting, it's not unique, but it's not common either, if that makes any sense. So it's able to sort of tunnel its command and control via the DNS system, which will get around a lot of IDSs and things that aren't looking for it, because traditionally things aren't looking at that information as being malicious. So it's just a way of getting around any sort of detection controls, or many detection controls.
Is that something you're finding with this particular group? Are they constantly evolving to try to adapt to these new techniques and evade detection? Or?
Yeah, they definitely learn from previous mistakes, if that makes any sense, where maybe their comms are blocked or they are detected via standard means. They're sort of adapting and overcoming those blocks to sort of still get the signal out and still get the command and control. So it shows that they're monitoring their campaigns for success quotas really, and sort of adapting to any problems that they get.
Right. So how does Cobalt Ulster compare to some of the other kind of APT and threat groups that you're seeing from kind of the Iran standpoint, if that makes sense?
Yeah. They're using very similar techniques and tactics as other threat groups that you could describe to that region, but they're just sort of showing that they have creativity and tooling, shall we say, and like their targeting is still very state-driven, if you will. It's not going after just random people. It's definitely sort of specifically targeted, but it shows that creativity.
You guys had mentioned what happened earlier in January with the U.S., targeting the Iranian military official and kind of the backlash that had caused. And essentially what you had mentioned is that there's still, it's going to take a little bit of time for any sort of cyber criminal activity to kind of crop out of that. I mean, is that correct?
Yeah. So it's like the phrase is sort of at a time and place of their choosing, if you will. So I think any sort of retaliation that comes, they will pick the time and place and the method of which they'll do the retaliation for that killing. So this sort of activity could be the part of the building up of the prepositioning for that. It could just be some other random activity. But sort of history shows that when they are provoked, as it were, there is a retaliation at some point down the line. And that could be 7 weeks or 7 months or 7 years, if you know what I mean.
Right. Well, I do remember right after in January there was some sort of a very small government website, U.S. government website was defaced but that ended up being essentially script kiddies. So
yeah.
So I think there's a lot of high alert, but not necessarily
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of patriotism as well.
Right, that's actually a good point. And I wanted to ask too about kind of cybercrime as a whole and some of the overarching trends you're seeing there. And when we were just talking, you mentioned ransomware is a big trend that we're seeing right now. Is there anything from the cyber criminal perspective that really sticks out to you as a trend in 2020?
Yeah, I think impact is the key word there. When they are hitting you, be it through a fraud or a scam or a ransomware or whatever, the impact of that event is massive these days, because the crooks have been doing this as long as we have or longer, so they've got that sophistication, they've got that creativity in their attacks. And what we're seeing, like the reason I mentioned ransomware was because what we're seeing now is when companies do get ransomware, it's big. And the ransoms are large, very large, and the damage is massive. So I think historically we've sort of maybe seen ransomware as being more of an annoyance, as it were, and like, yeah, that's just a background threat, and yeah, I lost a couple of workstations or whatever. Now it shows the crooks are doing real homework on their targets. They're trying to figure out, okay, who are these businesses, what do they do, which are the businesses that they're going to be most impacted by being offline, and how much are they likely to be able to pay. And they're doing all their sums that way, and they're sort of figuring out, which is why you see a lot of hospitals and health systems getting hit, because obviously they have to be up and they have to be working. So the criminals are definitely picking their targets based on likelihood of payment and how much. And it's brutal. But that's sort of where we're at these days, rather than being sort of spray and pray.
Yeah, no, that's a great point about the hospitals. And I know, too, earlier in 2019, there was the whole Texas ransomware, like school system attack and cyber attack, and kind of how that was being viewed as like a coordinated attack. And that really kind of elevated how ransomware was targeting different systems too. So I thought, that's kind of interesting. And then also we're seeing a lot of ransomware attacks against industrial systems and OT, like Norsk Hydro and some of the other ones. So really targeting that like downtime of operations, which is big for industrial and hospitals too, as you said.
Yeah, and it's a real case of, I think, I've been doing crime for a long time, and through police and banks and that sort of stuff, and we're seeing a real emergence of cyber criminals, as it were, showing that they're just criminals, in as much as with ransomware, they want to make you hurt as much as possible. And I think we've always sort of ascribed cybercrime as being, it's white collar, it's just some nerds playing around over there. But I think what we're seeing now is this emergence of, no, I'm going to hurt you, and you're going to pay me money, which is what crime has always been. But we've always had this nice gentleman's sort of divide. But I think we're showing our true colours now.
Right, and I think, you mentioned it's not just ransomware, it's like spam and phishing attacks. And I think I wrote a few weeks ago about a phishing website that they found that you put in your credentials, kind of standard run-of-the-mill, and then ask for, your photo ID, and then your credit card information, and then your picture of your passport. So, it really shows, a lot of cyber criminals are trying to get as much as they can out of victims, and, like you said, really do damage. So.
Yeah, and we're seeing the same thing with things like BEC and that sort of stuff, the business email compromise, where they're altering invoices out of companies and really hurting companies by taking, say an entire pay run as well is being stolen. And this is now, we're not just talking about, okay, I'm going to do a single fraud event against a retail banking account for $5,000. I'm going to cripple this business, and I'm going to take everything I possibly can from them because I'm a criminal.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your show.
Thank you very much. It's been great.